Alright, the chess match began before the finals even started, because out the gates, Becky had Bella assigned to Makani, so she's definitely been studying tape of the Mercury semis, and that was a smart tactic to take away Thomas getting to her patented inverted. Belle can show her just switch the matchup, because she's obviously big enough, so Thomas can't just try to bulldoze her by getting downhill. And with Asia being able to slide her feet, it really limited what Thomas could do against those two in that action. But she was still able to go to it when the aces ran their 3 to 4 guard lineup, so even though the aces guards were actually doing a solid job at hedging sometimes, she was still having some success whenever Belle was off the court, and just overall as a team, the aces small ball was what really led to them establishing a rhythm, because they just got to exploit their size advantage in the first half. Even with the aces basically reading everything, there was always a mismatch for one of their players in the post, and that was putting the aces in a constant scramble, because the aces were forced to tilt every time. That just opened up kickouts to find their shooters from deep, so it was just raining trays, and they even carried that rhythm over into the third. That was until the aces finally decided to zone up in the last 3 minutes of the quarter, because that stretch was the turning point in the game. First, they weren't able to continue using Thomas as the hub for their screening actions, and second, they weren't able to continue exploiting their size, so that was the start of their entire offense completely stagnating. For the aces, the most important aspect of their zone was Asia's positioning, because instead of her having to be high while she was guarding Thomas up top, she was able to get lower to provide the paint presence they needed, and at the same time, she was still able to track Thomas trying to flash middle, so she was naturally taking up a lot of real estate. That inherently shrunk the floor for the Mercury, and in turn, they eventually lost their rhythm for the rest of the night. So even though the aces started mixing in their man again throughout the fourth, it really didn't matter what their coverage was, because the most important part was the Mercury losing their rhythm. If it weren't for Satu's shot making that delayed the aces' momentum shift, then them finding some quick buckets in transition, they probably would have got walked down even worse in the fourth, because on the other end, the aces had their own players in a rhythm, and 2 of them came off the bench. I can't say I was that surprised, because the others usually play better at the crib, but I can say I was surprised to see them being responsible for getting the Aces offense going, and the starters really struggling against the Mercury's defensive coverages. The Mercury were consistent with their shell, so their help was always shifting and rotating in sync, and their guards were always hounding the Aces guards, especially Copper on Young. She was fighting over every screen, so she was able to recover back and front whenever their bigs showed, and that was really limiting Young's scoring in her screening actions, because it was rare for her to come off clean. At least her and even Gray were still making the right passes whenever one of them were on the rock, so the two were still being effective throughout. But it was more important for Evans and Lloyd to make their shots, because those passes wouldn't have really mattered if the two didn't. Both of them were always aggressive on the catch as soon as they subbed in, so in transition, they were either getting downhill or spotting up from deep. Then in the half court, Lloyd was making face cuts or converting on the flares, and Evans just continued to tray it, because she was on a ridiculous heater. Not only did they get the Aces offense going and kept them afloat in the first half, but they also made the biggest shots in the fourth, especially Evans in the last 4 minutes of the quarter, because her finding Tracy from the strong corner was the go-ahead that finally put the Aces up in the game. That was the lead they needed to secure the win, because Thomas had a severe case of the free throw blag in the last 30 seconds, so she couldn't get it back for the Mercury, and that allowed Young to do the opposite at the line before one final stop that now puts them 3 wins away from another chip. Just watch the tape.